My girlfriend said, "My brother needs a car. Give him yours. You can Uber." I replied, "Of course." Then I gave him the keys to a 1997 Ford with no AC, then bought a Tesla in my name. Now her brother is calling me from a mechanic, furious about the repairs. I, 29M, thought I had found the perfect girlfriend. We'd been together for 8 months, and everything seemed to be going smoothly until last Tuesday, when she dropped a bombshell that changed everything between us. I was sitting on my couch after work, scrolling through my phone, when she walked in with that determined look I'd learned to recognize. She told me her brother needed a car and that I should give him mine since I could just use Uber to get around. The casual way she said it, like she was asking me to pass the salt, caught me completely off guard. My car wasn't anything fancy, just a reliable sedan I'd bought 3 years ago, but it was mine. I'd worked overtime shifts to afford it, made every payment on time, and maintained it meticulously. The idea of just handing it over to someone I barely knew seemed insane, but before I could process what was happening, I heard myself agreeing. She seemed surprised by my quick acceptance, probably expecting more resistance. Her brother had been unemployed for 6 months and needed transportation for job interviews, she explained. I nodded along, watching her face light up with relief and gratitude. Something inside me snapped at that moment, seeing how easily she assumed I'd sacrifice my property for her family's convenience. That night, after she left, I sat in my garage staring at my car and formulating a plan that would teach both of them a valuable lesson about assumptions and entitlement. The next morning, I drove to my uncle's house across town. He'd been trying to sell his beat-up 1997 Ford for months, and I knew it was still sitting in his driveway. The thing was a mechanical nightmare. No air conditioning, windows that stuck, a radio that only picked up AM stations, and an engine that sounded like it was dying every time you started it. My uncle had been asking $800 for it, but I convinced him to let me have it for $500 cash. I spent the afternoon transferring the registration to my name and getting temporary insurance. The car barely made it back to my place, coughing and wheezing the entire way. Perfect. When my girlfriend arrived that evening with her brother, I was waiting in the driveway with the Ford's keys in my hand. Her brother was a lanky guy in his mid-20s who'd never held a steady job and had a habit of making excuses for everything wrong in his life. He looked at me expectantly, clearly anticipating getting his hands on my reliable sedan. I walked him over to the Ford and handed him the keys, explaining that this was the car I was giving him. The expression on his face was priceless, confusion mixed with disgust as he took in the rust spots, the cracked windshield, and the duct tape holding the passenger side mirror in place. My girlfriend immediately started protesting, saying this wasn't what she meant and that her brother needed something dependable. I reminded her that she'd asked me to give him my car, and technically, this was now my car since I just bought it. She tried arguing that I was being unreasonable, but I maintained my position with a smile. Her brother reluctantly took the keys, muttering under his breath about the car's condition. I told him it ran fine and that a little maintenance would sort out any issues. Deep down, I knew this piece of junk would cost him more in repairs than it was worth, but that wasn't my problem anymore. After they left, I drove my original car to a secure storage facility I'd rented earlier that day. Phase 1 of my plan was complete, but I wasn't finished yet. The following weekend, I did something I'd been considering for months, but never had the motivation to actually do. I bought a Tesla. Not a used one, not a basic model, but a brand new Model S with all the premium features. I'd been saving money for over 2 years, living frugally, and building up my credit score for exactly this kind of purchase. The car dealership experience was surreal. Here I was, dropping more money than most people make in a year on a vehicle, while my girlfriend's brother was probably trying to figure out why his new car was making grinding noises every time he shifted gears. I made sure to register the Tesla solely in my name, with no co-signers or shared ownership. This car was mine and mine alone, a fact that would become very important later. When I picked up the Tesla 3 days later, I drove it straight home and parked it prominently in my driveway. The sleek black exterior gleamed in the afternoon sun, and the silence of the electric motor was a stark contrast to the mechanical symphony of problems the Ford had been producing. My girlfriend showed up that evening as usual, but she stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the Tesla. She asked where I'd gotten it, and I explained that I'd bought it over the weekend. The confusion on her face was evident as she tried to process how I could afford such an expensive car while claiming I needed to give away my previous one. I told her I'd been saving up for years and finally decided to treat myself. She pressed me about the timing, asking why I hadn't mentioned wanting to buy a new car before giving my old one to her brother. I simply shrugged and said the opportunity presented itself. The conversation grew tense as she accused me of being manipulative and deliberately making her brother's situation more difficult. I countered by pointing out that I'd done exactly what she asked, given her brother a car so he could find work. The fact that the car wasn't what she'd expected wasn't my fault. Over the next few days, I began hearing stories about the Ford's performance through mutual friends. Apparently, her brother had managed to get it to a few job interviews, but each trip was an adventure in automotive uncertainty. The car had broken down twice in the first week, leaving him stranded and requiring expensive tow truck services. Meanwhile, I was enjoying every moment in my Tesla. The smooth acceleration, the high-tech interior, the envious looks from other drivers. It all felt like validation for the plan I'd executed so perfectly. My commute became something I actually looked forward to instead of just another mundane part of my day. My girlfriend's attitude toward me began shifting noticeably. She started making snide comments about my fancy car and how I was showing off while her brother struggled with transportation problems. I reminded her that transportation problems were exactly what we'd solved by giving him a car, and any issues he was having were his responsibility to handle. The breaking point came 2 weeks after I'd given her brother the Ford. I was at work when my phone started buzzing with angry text messages from an unknown number. Someone was calling me selfish, manipulative, and several other colorful terms I won't repeat. It took me a few minutes to realize the messages were coming from her brother. He'd taken the Ford to a mechanic after it started making a terrible noise while driving, and the diagnosis was catastrophic. The engine needed major work, the transmission was failing, and several other systems were on the verge of complete breakdown. The repair estimate was over $3,000, far more than the car was worth. His messages accused me of deliberately giving him a worthless piece of junk and demanded that I either pay for the repairs or give him a different car. I responded by reminding him that the car had been a gift and that I wasn't responsible for maintenance costs. If he didn't want it anymore, he was free to sell it or donate it to charity. This response triggered an avalanche of increasingly angry messages, culminating in threats to involve lawyers and claims that I'd committed some form of fraud. I screenshot every message and forwarded them to my own attorney, just in case the situation escalated further. That evening, my girlfriend arrived at my house in a fury unlike anything I'd seen from her before. She demanded to know why I was refusing to help her brother with the car repairs and accused me of setting him up to fail from the beginning. I calmly explained that I'd given him exactly what she'd requested, a car that belonged to me. The fact that she'd assumed it would be my good car instead of asking specifically was her mistake, not mine. I'd never promised the car would be perfect or maintenance-free. She argued that any reasonable person would understand she meant my reliable car, not some broken-down piece of junk. I countered that any reasonable person would be grateful for a free car and wouldn't expect the giver to also pay for all future repairs and maintenance. The argument escalated quickly, with her accusing me of being petty and vindictive. She said I deliberately sabotaged her brother's chances of finding work by giving him an unreliable vehicle. I pointed out that he'd had the car for 2 weeks and had managed to attend several job interviews, so it had served its purpose. She demanded that I either give her brother my Tesla or pay for the Ford's repairs. I laughed at the suggestion, explaining that the Tesla was mine and would remain mine, and that I wasn't responsible for maintaining gifts I'd given to other people. Update 1. The situation exploded the next day when her brother showed up at my workplace during lunch break. Security called me down to the lobby where he was waiting, clearly agitated and demanding to speak with me immediately. I agreed to talk with him in the parking lot, away from my coworkers and any potential scene. He launched into a tirade about how I'd ruined his life by giving him a worthless car and how he couldn't afford the repairs needed to make it roadworthy again. He'd apparently borrowed money from friends to pay for the diagnostic fees and was now facing pressure to repay debts he couldn't cover. I listened patiently as he outlined his financial struggles and transportation needs, then calmly explained that his problems weren't my responsibility. I'd given him a car as requested by his sister, and what he chose to do with that gift was entirely up to him. He threatened to sue me for fraud, claiming I'd deliberately deceived him about the car's condition. I reminded him that I'd never made any representations about the car's mechanical state and that he'd had the opportunity to inspect it before taking possession. The fact that he'd chosen not to do so wasn't my fault. The conversation ended with him storming off after I refused to budge on my position. I immediately called my girlfriend to inform her about her brother's workplace visit and made it clear that any future harassment would result in me involving law enforcement. That evening brought another confrontation, this time with both siblings arriving at my house together. My girlfriend had apparently convinced her brother that a united front would somehow pressure me into changing my mind about the situation. They presented what they called a reasonable compromise. I would trade my Tesla for the Ford, plus pay for all the necessary repairs, and her brother would give me the difference in value between the two cars. The proposal was so absurd that I actually started laughing, which only made them angrier. I explained that there was no universe in which I would trade a brand new luxury car for a 26-year-old Ford with massive mechanical problems, especially when I'd be paying for repairs on top of the trade. The suggestion showed a complete disconnect from reality. My girlfriend accused me of caring more about material possessions than her family's well-being. I responded that I cared about being treated with respect and not being taken advantage of by people who felt entitled to my property. The argument revealed some underlying issues in our relationship that I'd been ignoring. She clearly viewed my resources as extensions of her own and couldn't understand why I wouldn't automatically prioritize her family's needs over my own preferences. I told them both to leave and made it clear that I wouldn't be discussing the car situation anymore. The Ford was her brother's responsibility now, and any decisions about repairs or replacement were his to make. Update 2. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing my girlfriend's brother. The letter accused me of fraudulent misrepresentation and demanded that I either provide him with a suitable replacement vehicle or pay $5,000 in damages for his transportation difficulties and repair costs. I forwarded the letter to my own attorney, who found it more amusing than concerning. He explained that giving someone a gift, even a problematic one, doesn't constitute fraud unless you've made specific false claims about the item's condition or value. Since I'd never promised the Ford was in perfect condition, there was no legal basis for their complaint. My attorney drafted a response letter explaining the legal reality of their situation and suggesting they focus their energy on more productive solutions to their transportation needs. He also included a subtle warning about the consequences of making frivolous legal threats. Meanwhile, my relationship with my girlfriend was deteriorating rapidly. She'd stopped staying at my place overnight, and our conversations had become increasingly strained and hostile. Every interaction seemed to revolve around her brother's car situation and my refusal to provide additional assistance. I began to realize that our relationship had been built on some fundamentally different assumptions about money, family obligations, and mutual respect. Her expectation that I would automatically sacrifice my interests for her family's convenience revealed a level of entitlement that I couldn't ignore anymore. The final straw came when I discovered she'd been telling mutual friends a dramatically altered version of events, painting me as a wealthy manipulator who was deliberately sabotaging her unemployed brother's job search. According to her narrative, I was a heartless person who cared more about luxury cars than helping someone in need. When confronted about these stories, she defended her right to seek support from friends and accused me of trying to control her narrative. I pointed out that seeking support was different from spreading false information designed to damage my reputation. I made the decision to end our relationship that same evening. 8 months together hadn't been long enough to build the kind of trust and mutual respect necessary for a lasting partnership, and recent events had shown me that we were fundamentally incompatible in our values and expectations. Update 3. The breakup was surprisingly civil, probably because she was eager to be done with someone she now viewed as selfish and uncompromising. We divided up the few belongings we'd accumulated together and agreed to avoid each other's social circles as much as possible. 2 weeks after the breakup, I received another angry phone call from her brother. The Ford had finally died completely, breaking down on a busy highway and requiring an expensive tow to a junkyard. He'd been forced to abandon any hope of repairing it and was back to relying on public transportation and borrowed rides. He blamed me for his continued unemployment, claiming that potential employers had lost interest when he couldn't guarantee reliable transportation to work. I reminded him that plenty of people successfully job hunt using public transportation and that his employment struggles probably had more to do with his attitude and work history than his car situation. The conversation ended with him threatening to make me pay for ruining his life, which I interpreted as more empty bluster from someone unwilling to take responsibility for his own circumstances. I documented the call and added it to the file my attorney was maintaining about their various threats and demands. 3 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that her brother had finally found work at a warehouse across town. The job required him to take 2 buses each way, but he was apparently managing the commute successfully and had even started saving money for a down payment on a reliable used car. My ex-girlfriend had also moved on, beginning a new relationship with someone from her graduate program. According to our mutual friends, she'd learned to be more careful about making assumptions regarding her partner's willingness to support her family financially. As for me, I was enjoying single life and my Tesla more than I'd expected. The car had become a symbol of my willingness to stand up for myself and not be manipulated by people who felt entitled to my resources. Every time I drove it, I was reminded of the importance of setting clear boundaries and maintaining them even when facing pressure and criticism. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about relationships, family dynamics, and the difference between being generous and being taken advantage of. I realized that truly caring about someone doesn't mean automatically sacrificing your own interests for theirs, and that healthy relationships require mutual respect and consideration. Looking back, I have no regrets about how I handled the situation. I kept my word by giving her brother a car exactly as requested, and I protected my own interests by not allowing myself to be manipulated into ongoing financial support. The fact that the gift wasn't what they'd expected or hoped for wasn't my responsibility to fix. The Tesla is still running perfectly, requiring minimal maintenance, and providing me with reliable, comfortable transportation every day. Meanwhile, I've heard that her brother's warehouse job has taught him valuable lessons about personal responsibility and the satisfaction that comes from earning something rather than expecting it to be handed to you. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to let them solve their own problems and learn from their own mistakes, even when that approach makes you temporarily unpopular with people who preferred the easier path of depending on someone else's generosity. If you liked this video, please subscribe our channel to know what happened further in his life, and please click on the hype button.